To continue with that remark, the codes of ethics have been revised, and I think that the most important change was a change in emphasis from the fourth canon, which really is about the ethical duties you have to your client, to the first canon, which was a completely new thing. When engineering societies first began to organize themselves in America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, their emphasis in their codes of conduct and codes of ethics was really about how you treat your clients and how you treat other engineers rather than your duties to the public. So things do change, and sure, codes of ethics are bound to be partial, and they will change according to the times. The question you have to ask yourself is there anything in there, especially in the basic canons, the 6 canons, that you think somehow or another you can imagine that shouldn't be there? Well, I think that we all probably could find little things, but the question is, how much do you really think they might have gotten it wrong, or potentially what could be superseded? I do think that the fourth canon is problematic. I don't know if I included it in the last part of the course, but I had a student who needed an honors subject, and I asked him to look into that and whether he really thought that the fourth canon needed to be changed. So, I mean, I agree. Things do need to be updated, changed. Things can be mistaken, but that's the way it is. I like this here. I'm sorry. How do you work this thing? Ethical codes are all good and well until rules are piled up and one can't breathe without being faulted. I think having a base of codes is fine, but when pages upon pages of rules pile up in engineering professions, it becomes more suffocating and self-incriminating and less equity between the company and the worker. Well, that's not the first. That's a very honest statement. Nothing wrong with saying that. Not the first student I've had who's experienced a kind of like I don't know what the word, seeing it as a burden, and to some degree it is. The idea that you're being faced with all these ethical rules. You work hard enough to learn how to be an engineer technically, and then you have all these sort of ethical burdens put on top of it. I don't know what to say except I don't know what pages and pages of rules. The code of ethics is fairly short, but this is what you're getting into. If you take seriously the idea that there is something qualitatively different between professions and non-professions, then you simply have to accept that there's a higher ethical burden that's put on you as a professional. This is what you're getting into. Although, the Downey-Sieghart discussion of week 2 is definitely important here. It's a good. I mean, it's a honest expression of frustration, I suppose. I also don't think engineers shall at all times strive to serve the public interest, more like self-interest. This gets us into some things later. I don't know many who worked in companies I don't know many companies that I've worked with that actually feel the need to extend public knowledge and appreciation of engineering and its achievements. It's true. But then again, the companies aren't covered by the code, you are. Especially if it's not an engineering firm you're working for. I mean, if you're an engineer for a car company or a chemical company or utility, those entities are not covered by the code. The code is not for businesses or firms, even engineering. It's for individual engineers. So the companies don't have any responsibility to serve the public interest or to extend public knowledge. But according to the code, you do. Now, whether you want to buy that or not, I mean, that's a good question. But and this is why being a professional and being an employee is one of the really big issues in one of the big problems in engineering ethics. Can you really be both? Can you be a professional in the classical sense, where you do have to be altruistic to a certain extent? And how do you negotiate that, especially your first canon duty to the public, with your relationship with your employer? So it is a good points made here. But here's an example of that. Multiple software developers at Google quit their positions after Google decided to help the Pentagon develop AI for their drones to perform more drone strike. This is just one This is one just real work tricky situation in which the software engineers involved needed to decide if this conflict was worth losing your job for. Well, there's an interesting thing. I'm not really familiar with that situation at Google. I heard something about it that revealed that Google had been doing work. I thought it was Amazon. Anyway, doing work with the government for weapons. I mean, it's an interesting thing. You have to decide whether it's worth losing your job for. I can tell you the Board of Ethical Review would never say that an engineer had a duty to quit their job in this situation. They're much too conservative about things like that. So I think they would say it's a matter of personal conscience. But I just want to point out that there are certain things that, according to the code, it's not a matter of choice. Weapons development is always problematic. But say that you are working on an engineering project for a firm or for a corporation, which you know threatens the civilian public and is a violation of your first canon duties. Theoretically, it's not really a choice. You simply cannot do it. Like there are some things which are on the face of it prima facie wrong. For instance, I don't know, taking a bribe or violating safety standards or breaking the law. If your company does that, in a way, you don't really have a choice. I mean, you know that what your duty is. It's to either not participate in the project or to quit the company, or, depending on your interpretation of the first canon, to blow the whistle on your employer. So, yes, there are situations like these Google engineers where I think it is a matter of personal conscience, and you have to make your choice. There are other things which are so clearly violations of the spirit of professional engineering that you would have to quit. You know what I mean? If you get that. Just to skip to the end here, the fundamental canons certainly sound good, and engineers should strive to emulate the behavior that they describe, but different areas of engineering are probably too nuanced to adopt them directly without interpretation. Are these guidelines functional? Well, that's a great question. The NSPE code, the great thing about it is that everything that's there is there for a reason. Meaning that it's not really something that was made by philosophers. It's something made by thoughtful engineers. And if there's something in there, it's because there's a reason that they thought it should be in there, because something happened. People cheated their clients. People put the public at risk. People took bribes. People were not truthful in their public statements. People had conflict of interest that they didn't reveal. Things like this actually happened. And the reason that they're covered in the code is because they actually happen and they shouldn't happen, right? So are these codes functional? I don't know. I mean, I've done a little reading and thinking and teaching about ethical codes, both in business ethics and in medical ethics and engineering ethics. And I tend to have more respect for the things that are written on the level of the profession rather than the company. And one reason is because companies just make up codes of ethics, whereas the engineering, the NSPE Code of Ethics, for instance, has a long history, and many people have put a lot of thought into it. So, okay, maybe they're not functional at the end of the day, but I tend to think they have more substance than businesses' codes of ethics. And it may be that they're not practicable. But then again, you have to ask yourself what that really means. One of the things about being an engineer or being a professional in the general, in the classical sense, is you do have to acknowledge that there is an ethical component to what you do, which may prevent you from prospering. I think that, maybe that's too much to ask, and you're certainly, please disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but it does seem to be that's built in. So week 2, okay. This is really a discussion between Sighart and Downey. Sighart, Professions as the Conscience of Society, and then Downey's attempted takedown of Sighart. I suppose this remark here is really a Downey remark, very much in sympathy with Downey's criticism